All right, good afternoon to one and all. This is Brother Darren, Hebrews 9, verse 27, and John 3, verse 16, YouTube ministry. So, this video is a follow up to a question that Ali Dawah asked on a recent live stream, which he's now taken down, which was about 4 hours long, where he asked a question in the live stream as to why the Islamic State, ISIS, doesn't attack Israel. And we're going to look at that in a moment, this article. But also, the information I suppose I'm responding with would be a follow up to other videos that I've done recently. One called Israel, Zionists Stole the Land of Israel. And the original Ali Dawah video response was Russia attack a false flag. So, Ali Dawah, in my eyes, there's a claim for, was the attack by ISIS-K in Russia recently, was that a false flag attack, some form of deception that was somehow set up by Russia? But ISIS-K responded to that. But let's look at the response first to why the Islamic State doesn't want to attack Israel yet. Okay. So, this is an article that I found. Islamic State explains why it hasn't attacked Israel yet. It's another article that was on the Times of Israel, and it says the Islamic State terror group published an article explaining why it does not attack the Jewish state, arguing that the Palestinian issue should not get preferential treatment. On March 15th, the Islamic State weekly newspaper Al-Naba ran a story entitled Beit al-Maqdis, Jerusalem. First and foremost, an issue of Sharia law in which the terror group justified its lack of interest on Israel to the wider Muslim community. So that's what it was. The Islamic State has not carried out an orchestrated attack on Israel, though independent cells inspired by the terror group's ideology have been arrested by Israeli security forces. Several dozen Israeli Arabs are said to have been recruited by ISIS. I'm going to move on from that. But in the article, which was translated by watchdog group Memory, the Islamic State argued that the Palestinian cause does not take any precedence over an other jihadi struggle, which Hamas actually wanted to. Now, if we look at the reality of the world today, we will find that it is completely ruled by polytheism. This is what ISIS is saying, and its laws, except for the regions where Allah made it possible for the Islamic State to establish the religion. Therefore, jihad in Palestine is equal to jihad elsewhere, the article stated. The article also harshly criticized Arab exaggerators who have pressed the decades-old belief that Palestine is the Muslims' primary cause. Among those mentioned in this context were the former Arab nationalist leaders, Egyptian Gamal Abdel Nasser and Iraqi Saddam Hussein, who traded in the Palestinian issue and sold delusions to their followers, the article stated. There is a place, however, where jihad does take precedence, according to the article. In the Arab states that are governed by tyrants, first and foremost amongst those is the Saudi kingdom, where the two holy Islamic cities of Mecca and Medina must be rescued from the Saudi royal family. The apostate tyrants who rule the lands of Islam are graver infidels than the Jews, and war against them takes precedence over war against the original infidels, the article said. Despite the fact that Islamic State ranks in Syria and Iraq are swelled by fighters from across the world, the article calls for jihadists to take the fight to infidels nearest to them. Therefore, fighting the Jews should be left to Muslims in Israel/Palestine, while Syrian Muslims should fight Bashar Assad and Egyptian Muslims should fight Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Once a Muslim's native land has fallen under proper Islamic rule, the article said, only once that is done should he attack the adjacent infidel land. The key argument the article makes is that once the Arab regimes, which supposedly defend Israel, are toppled, then jihadi forces can arrive at the borders of the Jewish state and confront its army directly. Well, that's very similar to a concept or a notion that was recently revealed, where Mohammed Daif from Hamas had said that the idea was to try to, um, with the Alaska flood, the attack on October the 7th, 2023, the idea was to try and draw other Islamic Arab nation states into the conflict to totally wipe out Israel. But anyway, also though, Ali Dawah had mentioned as to why ISIS do not attack um, Israel, but ISIS have recently come out almost as if they'd heard Ali Dawah's recent statement, and this is what they've said. ISIS, and this was taken from the Daily Mail actually, Mail Online, yeah. And this says this: ISIS calls for lone wolves to carry out Ramadan massacre of Christians and Jews across Europe, US, and Israel. A top ISIS spokesman has called on lone wolves worldwide to slaughter Christians and Jews en masse in a chilling new declaration of terror. In a 41-minute long recording to mark the 10-year anniversary of the ISIS declaration of a caliphate in Iraq and Syria, Abu Hudhafaya al-Ansari declared Ramadan as the month of jihad and urged extremists to launch attacks in the United States, Europe, and Israel. He went on to urge Muslims to leave their homes and to migrate to join up with jihadists and strengthen their ranks. The spokesman also heaped praise on affiliates for their operations worldwide, making particular reference to Islamic State Khorasan, ISIS-K, the group that claimed last week's devastating terror attack at the Crocus City Hall concert venue in Moscow, which saw at least 143 civilians that are killed. Al-Ansari's deplorable message comes after he launched a campaign in January entitled "Kill Them Wherever You Find Them," in which he called for renewed focus on terror attacks and reminded Muslims that the Israel-Palestine conflict is a war on Jews, not just Israel. It goes on to say it's a religious, ideological war that will continue until we kill the Antichrist under the banner of the Prophet of Allah, tighten the plans and diversify operations, blow them up with explosives, burn them with incendiary bombs, shoot them with bullets, slaughter their necks with knives, and run them over with buses, he said. So that's what ISIS have said in response. And as you can see with Islam, what it does is it's taken bits of Judaism, bits of Christianity. That's why they've got the Antichrist reference in there. And they just have an anachronistic, revisionist religion of plagiarism. That's all that Islam is. All right. But now we're going to look at this claim by Ali Dawah, whereby he said that essentially, in alignment with the Palestinian notion that the land of Israel and the war against Hamas is really an attempt by European, whiter Zionist Jews to genocide Palestinians, and that is just their sole intent. And we're going to look at a little bit of the history of Jews in Israel and around those regions. So firstly, this is an article on Jewish Virtual Library, and it says Ancient Jewish History, the Babylonian Jewish Community. Sorry, I'm trying to be quick for time's sake. I only get 25 minutes on this upload, but and it says this: there was a group of Jews who never left Babylon after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century before Christ. This community more or less thrived, living since 129 BC under Parthian rule, a loosely knit semi-feudal state. It was able to develop its autonomous institutions with little interference from the royal government. So as we can see here, we always had Jews both in the land of Israel and just outside of the land of Israel, even before, say, for example, the 19th century or the 18th century, from way back even before Christ. It wasn't as if there weren't Jews that were either scattered or in the land of Jews, as in Israel. But that notion is what the Muslim and Islamic community largely seem to want to portray by making everything just as if European Jews have come and there were no other Jews about, or no other Jews were in that land or came to that land. Now, this is Operation Ezra and Nehemiah, and you can find a link for this on Wikipedia quite easily. And what this says is from 1951 to 1952, Operation Ezra and Nehemiah airlifted between 120,000 to 130,000 Iraqi Jews to Israel via Iran and Cyprus. The massive emigration of Iraqi Jews was among the most climatic events of the Jewish exodus from the Muslim world. So, as we saw before, back in this article, you had Jews who had never left Babylon, which some of them, I'm assuming, were airlifted out, or their descendants, in Operation Ezra and Nehemiah. You know, ancient Jewish communities, and they were airlifted to Israel. You know, post the creation of the state of Israel in 1948. And here we've got a Jewish exodus from the Muslim world. I'll just click on this quickly. But it says in the 20th century, approximately 900,000 Jews migrated, fled, or were expelled from Muslim majority countries throughout Africa and Asia, primarily a consequence of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Okay? So that's really interesting, and to see that tie in there. Let's have a look at the history of Jews in Iran. And it says this: the history of Jews in Iran dates back to late biblical times, mid first millennium BCE. Okay, so that's around, yet again, around 400 to 500 years before Christ. The biblical books of Chronicles, Isaiah, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah contain references to the life and experiences of Jews in Persia. In the book of Ezra, the Persian kings are credited with permitting and enabling the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Its reconstruction was carried out according to the decree of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, the king of Persia. Ezra chapter 6, verse 14. Okay, but let's have a look at the population and migration now. This is what we read. Driven by persecution, thousands of Persian Jews emigrated to Palestine in the late 19th and early 20th century, or I would say Israel. Many Jews who decided to stay in Iran moved to Tehran to be close to the Shah and to enjoy his protection. In 1868, Jews were the most significant minority in Tehran, numbering about 1,578 people. It then rose to 5,571 by 1884. By 1932, there were just under 7,000 Jews. Let's read on a little bit further. At the time of the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, there were approximately 140,000 to 150,000 Jews living in Iran, the historical center of Persian Jewry. But it says this: about 95% have since emigrated, with the immigration accelerating after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, when the population dropped from about 100,000 to about 400,000. The Jewish population of Iran in 2012 to 2013 was about just under 9,000. And here we read: the World Population Review numbers the Jews in Iran as 8,500 in 2021. So we can see that the Jews have been persecuted. Some of them have very ancient communities, even before Islam was established, and they've had to flee Islamic countries, sometimes in massacres, discrimination, pogroms, and so on and so forth. And these aren't even European Ashkenazi Jews. Here's another article that I found. And this article was on the Los Angeles Times, and it says, no, Israel isn't a country of privileged and powerful white Europeans, as in there tends to be this stereotype, largely as a result of what happened with some European colonialism, which was influenced really um, by Islam and Catholicism and the European mind state at the time. Not all Europeans, but some around colonialism. But this article says this, and I'll go down. But we're getting somebody that's talking, and they're saying, "I'm an Israeli. I'm the son of an Iraqi Jewish mother and a North African Jewish father. It's gut wrenching to witness this shift." But it says, sorry, let me start up here. Along with resurgent identity politics in the United States and Europe, there is a growing inclination to frame the Israeli Palestinian conflict in terms of race. According to this narrative, Israel was established as a refuge for oppressed white European Jews who in turn became oppressors of people of color, the Palestinians. But this person is saying that's not the case. And listen to what they go on to say. I am Mizrahi, as are the majority of Jews in Israel today. We are of Middle Eastern and North African descent. Only about 30% of Israeli Jews are Ashkenazi, or the descendants of European Jews. I'm baffled as to why the mainstream media and politicians around the world ignore or misrepresent these facts and the Mizrahi story. Perhaps it's because our history shatters a stereotype about the identity of my country and people. Jews that were expelled from nations across the Middle East have been crucial in building and defending the Jewish state since its outset. And it goes on to say this: Israel, the world's only Jewish state, was not established for just one type of Jew, but for all Jews from every part of the world, the Middle East, North Africa, Ethiopia, Asia, and yes, Europe. No matter where Jews physically reside, they maintain a connection to the land of Israel, where our story started and where we continue to craft it. I'm going to go on to read some more information in reference to that from some notes that I've taken, and probably submitted this information before, but I'll say this. Firstly, Palestinians have a right to live in that land without oppression. You can read Exodus chapter 22, verse 21, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33 to 34. But the Islamic fundamentalist ideology and jihadists and Arab anti-Semitism are also reasons which have historically made groups attack. For instance, you have the destroyed Jewish temple, the second temple on the Temple Mount. Underneath those ruins, on top of those ruins have been placed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, that was incorporated into the name of the operation to attack Israel on October the 7th, 2023. So it's a later innovation to make it look as if Israel and even the Bible characters have always been Muslim. And that has been enjoined to the Palestinians, I guess, some of their woes in that land. But the militant side of it, whereby Palestinians have kept attacking or had Palestinian militants and have formed terrorist factions that they say are occupation resistance, is all from out of Islam. Now, among the lies being spread is an effort to undermine Israel's legitimacy by accusing it of being a settler colonial state. Those spreading this lie argue that Jews have no historical connection to the land of Israel and that Zionists, those who support the right of Jewish self-determination and national homeland in the land of Israel, came to colonize the land, taking it from the Palestinians beginning in the late 19th century. However, this claim ignores the thousands of years of deep connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. The Lord promised the regathering of the nation of Israel after diaspora judgment and the city of Jerusalem as he'd sworn it unto Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, being Israel. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 38 to 40. Amos chapter 9, verse 11 to 15. Genesis chapter 35, verse 12. Exodus chapter 32, verse 13. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 8. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 to 5. And Joshua chapter 21, verse 43 all contain that type of information. Now, Luke chapter 21, verse 24 says, they shall fall as in the Jews, by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. Well, guess what? Israel as a nation is no longer under Roman or Muslim control. We have a timeline of Israel and Jerusalem from the 7th century on, from the advent of Islam up until 1948. We have Romans, Byzantines, Persians, Caliph Omar, a caliphate under him, and the Muslims. Then we have the Umayyads, then we have the Abbasids, then we have Saladin, then we have Crusaders, then we have the Mamluks, then we have the Ottomans, and then we have the British that are all laying claim over Israel. And we have a historic record of massacres and pogroms for all Jews without a homeland, including the Holocaust worldwide up until 1948, and still continuing, including October the 7th, 2023. Okay, but in the 19th century, as European Jews suffered from growing anti-Semitism, they weren't the only ones. Jews in many different lands, Arab Islamic lands, were suffering from being targeted, massacred, and pogroms. But in the 19th century, as European Jews suffered from growing anti-Semitism and violence against them, uh, the concept for them was born of Zionism, but the concept of Zionism has always been there for if Jews are being oppressed, especially when you read after the Lord has judged the Jews and brings them back into a land. It doesn't even necessarily have anything to do as to whether Jews are truly repentant, or whether they accept Christ as their Messiah. They get they get a period or a time for judgment, and then a recall to the land. Okay, so that's what happened. That's what happened. Small groups of Zionists, pioneers from Eastern Europe, read about the pogroms in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, um, many different parts of sort of Eastern Europe and Russia that these Jews suffered. But however, Jews consist of much diversity aside from European Jews or Russians and Ukrainians. You've got the Mizrahim Jews, and within them, the thought is you've got Iranian Jews, Iraqi Jews, Egyptian Jews, Sudanese Jews, Tunisian Jews, Algerian Jews, Moroccan Jews, Lebanese Jews, Libyan Jews, Syrian Jews, and various others. You've also got Georgian and mountain Jews from the Caucasus. You've got Indian Jews, the Malabar Yehudim, the Kokin Jews. You've got Beni Israel from Ethiopia, Beni Menashe, Beni Ephraim, Afghan Jews, Bukharan Jews, Chinese Jews, and most notably the Kafiing Jews. Now, Palestinian forces, though not all people, having largely been Islamically inspired, have been involved in the 1947 to 1948 civil war against Israel, which they lost. That picked up in aggression in January 1948 after the United Nations resolution for a partition of the land of Israel. They were unhappy with that, and increasingly, Palestinian militants or their forces were warring against Jews. But they were also involved, and they lost that war anyway, the 1947 to 1948 civil war. They were also involved in the 1948 Israel-Arab war, when 5 Arab nations, which attacked the newly formed Israel, attacked it after its statehood declaration for the new state on the 15th of May 1948. In the 1967 Six-Day War, prior to that, you had the PLO. They were openly engaged in acts of violence against Israeli citizens, both within Israel and outside of Israel. Terrorist attacks by the group grew more frequent. In 1965, 35 raids were conducted against Israel. In 1966, the number increased to 41. In just the first 4 months of 1967, 37 attacks were launched. The targets were always civilians. Most of the attacks involved Palestinian guerrillas infiltrating Israel from Jordan, the Gaza Strip, and Lebanon. The orders and logistical support for the attacks were coming, however, from Cairo and Damascus. Then you've got the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Now, that war began on the 6th of October 1973 when the Arab coalition, led by Egypt and Syria, jointly launched a surprise attack against Israel on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur, which had occurred during the 10th day of the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. Now, that war, they say, was as a result of losing the 1967 war. And Yeah, there was some things that they were contesting there, I believe, in regards to the land, but regardless, they attacked Israel in 1973 again. Now, during the course of that war, Palestinian militias from southern Lebanon attacked several attacks on launched several attacks on Israeli border communities. All of the attempts to infiltrate Israel failed, and 23 militants were killed and 4 were captured during the clashes. Most of the activity was focused on Katyusha rocket and anti tank missile fire on Israeli border communities. In the attack, some civilians were injured, mostly lightly, and damage was made to property. On the 10th of October, Palestinian militants fired some 40 rockets on Israeli communities. Now, the October 7th, 2023 Alaska flood attack, that comes roughly 50 years and a day after the 1973 war. Now, why would this all matter? I said this before in previous posts, because Jesus is now the new high priest for Jew and Gentile, but man and Satan still want to nullify God's promises and covenants to Jews and salvation that can come for them through the Messiah Jesus Christ. So one tactic is to keep everything hostile, keep people at war and being unforgiving. Now, Jesus says that unless you forgive, you cannot be forgiven. Matthew chapter 6, verse 14 to 15. But I also said before that the Jews had killed James, the brother of Jesus. Not the Christian Jews, obviously. I think this happened under the Sanhedrin. Look up James, the brother of Jesus. These are people who rejected Jesus, and James was killed, the brother of Jesus, and they used to go to people, the Jews, who were full of the Holy Spirit, to consult that prophet or that person with the Holy Spirit just in times of hardship or war. But with them having killed James, they say between 62 to 69 AD, the Jews were then driven to revolt against the Romans, and the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD, and eventually the Muslims stuck there. Yeah, eventually the Muslims stuck the Dome of the Rock up there in the Alaska Mosque. And of course, the October 7th, 2023 attack was called the Alaska Flood. Okay? So Jesus, though God from eternity, in fact, let's go back to Malachi. The book of Malachi, chapter 1, verse 6 to 14, says that defective offerings were being given and no tithes. And in chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, the Lord said he would come to the temple and purify the priesthood, the sons of Levi, and that was later fulfilled with Jesus. Jesus, though God from eternity, became a man in order to suffer death and to serve as our high priest. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9. So all of this now is in regards to a distorted Jesus via Islam, because they claim Jesus as a prophet who would approve of jihad and war, and wouldn't identify with the true Jewish Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and is warring really against that and the Jews and covenant promises and prophecies that were given to the Jews for them to return to the land. So I want to go on to show this now. And what we read here is, actually, I'll do this in two parts. Let's end this as part 1, and I'll upload